Hi, this is Calculon 000, and this is my Let's Play guide to Kerbal Space Program. This is the game version 0.16, and it's using all vanilla parts and no mods. Kerbal Space Program is a game where you design, build, and launch your own rocket ship using roughly the same mechanics that real rocket ships use. You use various stages, and with physics and space and atmospheric drag and a whole bunch of other great stuff. So let's get started. Here we have the Space Center. It consists of 4 buildings. The spaceplane hangar, which I never use because I can't build a spaceplane that doesn't crash horribly upon immediate launch. The vehicle assembly building, where you build and design your rocket, which you then take out to the launch pad, where you launch it into space. And the tracking station is where you track all the things in space, to see if they're still staying in space. And if you have any ongoing missions that you quit before we're actually complete, you can resume them from here. Let's go design our first rocket, and maybe we'll actually get into space. Here we have our first rocket that we're going to build. So basically, when you start building a rocket, you're presented with this screen. Now, we're not going to use either of these 3 because, well, I don't know how to do space planes, like I said. But basically, you start with a command module, which is the heart and soul of your rocket. You attach parts onto the command module, and then attach parts onto those, and it basically acts as a centerpiece of your entire rocket. It's where the crew, either 1 or 3 crew, sit. Since this is our first rocket, we're just going to use the smallest possible command module. This little guy right here. And if you want to load a rocket, that's how you do it. Ones that are saved. So basically, here is the vehicle assembly hangar. And you have a whole bunch of little staff doing very, very important, busy things. So basically, here's our command module, and we're just going to build it with basic parts. Now, there are a few basic parts to a spaceship. There's fuel, and then rockets, engines, which burn that fuel. And basically, everything you add onto the rocket has weight, and it can all take damage, and if it overheats, and if any one component overheats, it will explode, and probably take the rest of your rocket with it, possibly. And yeah, basically, there's a lot of ways to crash in this game, and very few ways to actually get where you're going. So basically, let's add this fuel tank, which is the same size as our command module, and we have a choice of one of 2 engines here. Basically, there's this one, which has no thrust vectoring, but has a little more thrust. And then there's one that does have thrust vectoring, but isn't as powerful. Basically, if you have a choice between more performance, more power, and more control over that power, you basically want to have more control, because if you have a bunch of, thrust, but it's not going in the direction you want it to go, then it's either not helping you, or is actually hindering your performance. And, basically, you're not going to go in the direction you want to go, and might actually die, or break apart, or blow up, or all 3 at the same time. So basically, we're going to attach this engine that has thrust vectoring, and since, this is our first rocket, we want it to have as much control as possible over its direction and speed and such, and all those good things. And we're going to name it Mini Rocket 0. So we're going to save and launch and see how the space physics actually work. Now, when you first, bring a rocket out to the launch pad, basically the game takes a little time to load, and then finally, once it's loaded all the physics and stuff, it's good to go. So you launch your rocket, and you can control the thrust, throttle down, throttle up. You can see the actual thrust exhaust is going, bigger and smaller, and you can move around with the WASD keys. Now, this is the trackball here, and basically this circle here will show you the direction you're going toward, and on the other direction, this will show you the direction you're going away from. And these are really, really useful when it comes to determining where you're going and where you want to go. Now, basically, this trackball is in relation to the command pod and not the camera. As you can see, I move the camera around, the trackball's not really moving, but I move the rocket around, the trackball moves. Now, this trackball has a north direction and then a south direction at 180 degrees, and, east and west the other directions. It has a horizon, and straight down it points toward the center of gravity of the celestial body you happen to be orbiting at the time. So basically, it's in relation to both the command pod and the planet or moon or other celestial body you happen to be orbiting at the time, and it's extremely useful for determining which direction you want to go, and basically, this will tell you how fast you're going. In relation to the surface, since we haven't actually gotten into space yet. So that'll tell you how fast you're going. That will tell you what current throttle is at. and this will tell you how many Gs your astronauts are experiencing. Bob Kerman here, he's fearing for his life, which absolutely he should be, because he's probably about to die, since we don't actually have a parachute or anything to slow down. And as he's falling to his death, let me just show you some other things. This is the altimeter. It's from sea level, not the surface of the planet. Important to keep that in mind, because, you know, the moons and the planet are quite hilly, and basically you're going to hit the surface of the planet unless you land in water far before you actually get to 0 elevation. But since it looks like we're going to actually hit the water, this will read 0 by the time we actually hit it. This is your vertical speed meter. Now, if it's high negatives, it means you're falling really fast. High positives, it means you're rising really fast. And 0 means you're maintaining a constant altitude. This is your atmosphere meter. Atmo meter. Whatever. It will tell you how much air pressure you're currently undergoing. Now, the higher... And he's dead. The more air pressure that you're currently undergoing, the more air resistance you're going to experience as you travel. Basically, the goal when you launch a spaceship... Now we can go back to the vehicle assembly building. The goal as we launch a spaceship is to get out of the atmosphere as fast as possible. So that is what we're going to do with the second iteration of Mini Rocket Zero here. So basically we want to, let's see, add another fuel so we can go up higher. And maybe it would be nice if our astronauts didn't have a guaranteed death every time they went on a mission. So we're going to add a parachute so they can land safely. And maybe an SAS module. I'll show you what those are next time we launch. That's for stability. And perhaps another stage right here with a coupler. And actually one up here as well, because we don't want a whole bunch of weight attached to our command module when we're parachuting back down to the ground. And a solid rocket booster. Now here's several things I need to tell you about. The solid rocket booster, the solid fuel booster rather, just like in real life, is basically a cylinder full of solid matter that is fuel. And once you start it, you cannot control its thrust or stop it in any way. So they're actually kind of dangerous, even though they do help you get that much needed thrust right at the beginning of your launch. So if you cluster too many of them together, they will make each other overheat, and when they overheat, they and whatever fuel is left inside them will explode and probably make your rest of your rocket explode along with it. And that is something you want to avoid because it will generally ruin your day. Now, I've added 2 couplers here, and there's actually several stages now that the game has automatically added. As you can see, this will list your stages here. Basically, you press spacebar to initiate the first stage, which would be this booster, then press spacebar again, and that will make the coupler detach, and then spacebar again will activate that engine, and so forth. And the reason you want to do that is because as some parts of the rocket run out of fuel, they then become dead weight, and you want to detach them. This is why real rockets in real life also have stages, because getting into space, you're basically fighting the gravity well of the planet, and it's a really hard thing to do and takes a lot of energy, especially when you're fighting air resistance the entire time you're in the atmosphere. Air resistance will continually leach velocity and energy from you, so it's imperative you want to get out of the atmosphere as fast as possible. So basically, this is the RCS. We don't have any RCS thrusters as of yet, but when you do, they will help you maneuver greatly to a great degree. And they are essential for landers because they stop your horizontal motion, which is essential for landing a lander. But we'll see that much later. An SAS means you activate the SAS modules here. Those are modules that basically have big-ass gyroscopes in them and will stop your rocket from moving around. When you activate it, your rocket will continue to point in the same direction it was pointing at when you activated it, and they will stop all spin that the rocket is currently undergoing. So basically, it's a good idea to activate them before you even launch, and we can move the thrust up here because it won't actually affect the... we can't actually control the thrust coming out of the solid booster initially, so it doesn't really affect the first stage, but the second stage we're going to want to have as much thrust as possible coming right out of the gate. So we're going to launch here. As you can see, the fuel meter's going down in that solid booster, and because we're small and light, it actually, one booster is more than enough to get us going. As you can see, we keep on accelerating and our speed gets higher. If you're still in the atmosphere and you see this number going down, it usually means you're in big trouble because you're about to stop going up and then start going down. So basically, our altitude is up, we ran out of fuel there, so we're going to want to detach that and activate our second stage. Now, this is roughly the same as you saw that before, but we have more fuel, which means we're probably going to get more altitude before we finally run out of fuel. Now, this is a good time before this fuel runs out to show you the map mode. You press M to go into the map mode. Basically, this will show you the path that you're going, and this is the high point known as the apiopsis. I don't know how to pronounce that. Feel free to correct me in the comments. And basically it'll show you the highest point that you're going to get to in your orbit. You can't really see it, but as you can see right here, it's actually an orbit that goes around the center of gravity of the celestial body you happen to be orbiting. Basically, all orbits are an ellipse, with one of its centers being the center of gravity of the planet you're orbiting. In this case, that happens to be the homeworld. We're halfway through our second tank, and I'm not sure. We have an altitude of about 20,000 meters, which is 20 kilometers, 24 kilometers now. And basically, that will be the high point that you get to before you start falling back. I don't really have the power to achieve orbit, but I believe we are reasonably successful. We have a decent chance of actually getting into space in this trip right here. So basically, the atmosphere ends at 70 kilometers. And at that point, you're actually in space, and this meter will go down to 0. So basically, what you want to do is get a rocket powerful enough to get you out of the atmosphere, and then get you enough horizontal motion to basically orbit the planet. And I'll show you exactly how that works on the next iteration of a rocket when we modify this model. And we now officially have made it into space, and the game will let us actually speed up time. As you can see, we've reached our peak, which was 161,000 meters, and we're falling back down. The second we hit the atmosphere, the game automatically makes us go into real time. And since we are not exactly planning on landing on the previous stage, since that's dead weight, we're going to detach it. And something interesting will happen if I let this fall freely. This is the same kind of command module design they use in real life. The Apollo missions had this kind of command module design. It's basically got a heat shield and then a conal-shaped command module on top of it. Now, the aerodynamics are such that this heat shield will it will automatically point toward the direction that the air is rushing past to protect the rest of the vessel from the heat of re-entry, which isn't yet a mechanic in this game, but is in real life. Now we're falling toward the Earth, and as you can see, our velocity is rapidly decreasing because of the increased air resistance we're getting due to the atmosphere. And we're going to slow down even more. And as you can, we have to be careful because we're going to hit somewhere inland, so we will hit the surface before our altitude actually reaches 0. So before that point, you'll usually be able to see trees and objects on the ground in this version of the game, as you can see over there, and they'll load below us in a minute. And we'll want to deploy the parachute before we actually get to the ground. So let's deploy that now. As you can see, it doesn't open right away, and the second it does, it drops our speed to a leisurely 6.3. That's an explosion of the previous stage, and that would have happened to us if we didn't have a parachute. Basically, it reduces your speed to a leisurely 6.3 meters per second, and basically, land or water, he'll survive just fine if he actually lands with the parachute opened. And you can skip ahead if you want, but basically we can just watch him leisurely drift down to the surface of the homeworld. Yep. So, basically, this meter is your G-force meter. Now, your Kerbal crew members aren't actually going to die if they experience high Gs like they would in real life, but around 8 or 9 Gs, where the red area begins, human beings pass out, and around 10 or 15 Gs, they die. So, if in a future game update, if this ever is implemented, it's probably going to be something you want to watch out for. But heavy deceleration is no problem in this version of the game, so don't worry about it. This is some information over here. This tells you what stage you're on. This will actually highlight different parts of your, different parts of your spacecraft. Help you get a feel for, highlight which part is which. This will give you, what your pitch roll in the eye is or what you're trying to do. And basically, that's it. Another tip, real quick, if you're in map mode, you can move that at any time during the game, and you can actually control your ship while you're in map mode, although you can't really see if you're running out of fuel, so you do still need to switch between the two views. So, we've landed safely. So we can end the flight, and this will give us a list of basically what happened at what time during the flight, and what our outcome was. If we basically crashed, it would say catastrophic outcome, and this will give us some stats on what we achieved in our flight. Basically, most G-force endured, distance traveled, yada yada yada. So let's go improve our rocket again and see if we can't get into orbit. Okay, so we're going to need a little bit more power to get into orbit. We have achieved space flight. We did leave the atmosphere, and we have technically gotten into space. So that's a big accomplishment there, but we need a little more power and a little more fuel to get into orbit. So we're going to do that. And one thing that I should tell you about is this is an SAS module, as I've already explained, but an advanced SAS module does everything a normal SAS module does, except it also controls wings such as this when activated, and it will control these automatically to keep you flying on the straight and narrow. So let's add one of those. Now, in this version of the game, it seems all the items actually have a cost, but you don't really have a limited budget at all yet. But I'm sure that will be coming in a future update, so that's something you might want to keep in mind as you continue to play this game through the various updates that come out for it. Now, this is the symmetry feature, so basically you can attach something to the side, but if it's asymmetrical, chances are you're going to immediately die when you launch, because it will be really unstable. So the symmetry lets you attach things, you know, symmetrically to the sides of your spacecraft. You can go no symmetry, 2 sides, 3 sides, 4 sides, 6 sides, or 8 sides. For our purposes, we don't want to cluster too many solid rocket boosters together, so we're going to go 4 sides, because they'll overheat each other if they're too close together before they run out of fuel. So basically, these are radial decouplers. Now basically, these separate whatever's being attached to the main part of the aircraft a little bit, so you don't get as much of an overheating problem, but they're a little bit flexible, so you don't want to touch too much onto them, or they'll flex around and cause massive instability. These little radio couplers are flush against the actual side of the spacecraft, so they're closer. You might have more overheating problem, possibly, but they're not nearly as flexible. So it's really a balance trade-off. Whatever you want to design. Basically, there's a lot of parts. Basically, this whole game is about experimentation, see what they do. But for now, this is about doing basically the job of a space center, which is to get into space, then to orbit, and all the other good stuff, you know, beyond that. So we're going to add a few more boosters, add some wings here. Since this has thrust vectoring, we won't really need the wings once once this is firing, so I'm going to put them down here so they drop away with this fender booster here. So basically we have a few stages here. First these boosters fire, then they get detached, then this one fires, and then it gets detached once it runs out of fuel, and then this fires, and you've pretty much seen this song and dance before. So let's save and launch and see if we can't get into orbit using the power of this rocket. Physics is loading. Okay, so doesn't that look nifty? It's looking more and more like a super awesome rocket already. And it looks like I actually made a mistake here. These are off-center. Hopefully it won't affect too much, but it might. So let's turn on SAS, thrust to full, and spacebar. Yep, seems to be fine so far. Now, as you can see, if you make a rocket too long or too large, or has too many parts that can flex against each other, because the physics model of this game does have the components flexing against each other, you might get this problem. Now, this is something that you're going to have to watch out for the larger a rocket you have, because it's going to be a bigger and bigger problem. And eventually, it might not only cause your rocket to point in a direction that you don't intend, but it might get so severe that it will literally tear your rocket apart. So it's something you got to watch out for the longer and more heavy, top-heavy a rocket you have. So, as you can see, we are getting 10, 11 kilometers so far. And now basically when you launch and you want to go into orbit, what you're going to want to do is go up as fast as you can to escape the atmosphere as fast as you can. And you want to do that because atmospheric drag is stealing. It's constantly leaching energy from you, thrust from you, velocity from you, as long as you're inside it. Now when we get to about 20 kilometers, we're going to then want to turn in a direction 45 degrees. Now which direction doesn't matter, since we're not trying to get to any specific celestial body or moon so far. This is all about just getting into orbit, hook or by crook. So basically we want to turn 45 degrees when we get to 20,000 meters. And we want to wait until this high point in our orbit actually reaches at least 70. And then, once we get to that top point, we're going to want to move in a lateral direction as much as we can. Okay, looks good so far. We're going to wait until that's 70, at least, and that's good. So, I'm going to save fuel by letting my momentum take me further. I don't need to worry about atmospheric drag at this point too much, since the air is pretty thin already. I'm going to want to turn. I usually like to keep my spaceship upright. You don't need to, but I like to. And there. You see what I mean about the SAS? It stabilized where my rocket was pointing. And it's a really handy method of basically getting your rocket to stop turning. That's basically what they're there for. And basically how orbital mechanics works is you're up here, and then once you're at this point, you want to have a lateral motion as fast as you possibly can. But because this planet is a sphere, you go this way, and the surface of the planet will drop off against you, and it seems like you're going higher. Now, the gravity of the planet is still pulling you down, so you will fall. But if you have a high enough lateral motion, you'll fall at less speedily a rate than the surface of the planet will fall away from you. So then you'll actually fall around the planet continuously all the time, and you'll basically be in free fall, but you'll never actually get any closer to the surface of the planet because it constantly curves away from you. That is the basis of an orbit. And because there is nothing to slow you down, there's no atmospheric drag, this can only be achieved in space, and you don't even need any fuel to maintain it once it's achieved. And so we are at just about our peak, and we're going to want a full thrust up. And you can see our orbit change already. And we're basically going to want to keep doing this until this ellipse gets outside of the surface of the planet and is actually, at all points, at least 70 kilometers from the surface. And as you can see, because we are going full blast in a lateral motion, we actually aren't falling back because the surface of the planet is now curving away from us. So you don't need to worry about falling back because you're not only when you do lateral motion, you're also raising your altitude because the surface of the planet actually curves away from you when you go sideways. That's the key to how an orbit actually functions. Now we're going to want to lower to save fuel, we're going to want to lower ourselves. You know, how fast we're firing our rockets. And here's a pro tip. You can actually use the trackball here. And it seems we're still firing a little bit, so we're going to lower that. And this is your high point of your orbit. And as you can see, the low point is almost gotten off the surface of the planet right here. Now, one basic fact about orbital mechanics is if you fire your rockets at any point, that will change the opposite point of the orbit. So, because I want to raise this opposite point, this point of the orbit, I'm going to speed up here. And you'll see what that means when I speed up time and wait until we actually get to that point. See, notice how I'm not actually firing my thrusters at all. I'm saving fuel by waiting until the most effective point in our orbit to adjust the other side of that orbit. This is all about fuel management because fuel takes weight, and so you can only have a very limited amount with you because it also takes fuel to get the thrust to get even more fuel up into space when your rocket gets bigger than it is now. So now we're at our highest point in the orbit, and I'm going to point the rocket using the trackball. You see how useful this is? And we're going to wait until that is. Activate SAS. You see how it stops. And full thrust. And you see how immediately our orbit changes. Now this has become the new low point because the other parts of the orbit have got so much higher because of the extra kinetic energy I've given the spacecraft. And now we have officially achieved orbit. Before it was what's called a suborbital flight, where we only did a partial orbit and then fell back down to the surface of the planet. But this is a full-on official orbit. Congratulations. So you can speed up time. Once we get above 120 kilometers, we can speed up time even more. And once our elevation gets, once our altitude gets lower, it will automatically lower the time speed factor for us. And right there, it lowered time again for us. So as you can see, I could orbit like this forever and ever, and that's how basically in modern day satellites are even able to function, because they launch and then they get into orbit, and it takes very, very little energy to actually maintain that orbit because there's no drag whatsoever in space. So The problem becomes you need fuel to actually get back home. Unless you want your guy to sit up in here in space and theoretically starve to death, even though that's not yet a mechanic in the game. It probably will be one day, but who knows. He's been in orbit for 46 minutes and 32 seconds. So we're going to speed up time, wait until this point of the orbit. Since this is the lowest point in the orbit now, we would have the most efficient use of our fuel would be to slow down at this point to lower this point, and as long as we actually get it somewhere in the atmosphere, we'll have what's called a decaying orbit, which means the atmospheric drag will make our orbit slower and smaller until we actually hit the surface of the planet. But not too hard because we have a parachute. So we wait until this point in the orbit. Then we slow down time again. And as you can see, conveniently, since we were maintaining the same direction the whole time, we're already pointing in the direction we're traveling away from. So I'm just going to get it a little more accurate here. There we go. And fire rockets. And we're gold. And so now we have no more use for the stage. I'm going to turn this way, detach it while pointing up so it has very little chance of hitting us again. There we go. And I can basically let the capsule free float and fall back down. And you've already seen the process at which re-entry occurs and we use the parachute in our last launch. So that's awesome. We can end the flight, and now we can try for the additional challenge of landing on the big moon, which is right here, Mun. You can press tab to focus on different celestial bodies, in this case Mun, and this is Mun. It is very visible from the surface of the planet, and the other moon, the farther small one, Minmus, it's not very visible at all from the Kerbal sky. So our next challenge is this moon, landing on it, and getting our guys back home safely.